What is the first thing you think of when I say the word Spey? Is it the cast, the flies, the rod, or is it something else? How about the Mickey fin or the Starling and Purple? There are so many diverse ways to fish a fly, but today we're going to blend some of the old with the new, some steelhead with the trout, and some fly tying so you are better equipped to fish the fly and understand how to swing flies for all species. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. How's it going? I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. Grew up around a little fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers and fly tyers than just about anyone out there. Marty Howard, author of Steelhead Fly Tying with Dec Hogan, and someone who has spent time around the fly shop, is going to share his swung fly journey. We're going to find out about a new fly tying book for trout that's coming out right around the corner. And we're going to hear why he doesn't care if gear fishermen or sleds are going up and down the river before he swings his fly on that run. And we're going to get a little bit of a tip on staying warm this winter. Plus, you're going to find out how he ended up fishing multiple times over the years with Tiger Woods and his good friend Mark O'Meara, two famous pro golfers. We're going to get into that story today. Another passionate steelhead angler. Here he is, Marty Howard, at Marty Howard on Instagram. How you doing, Marty?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Great. Yeah, it's awesome to have you on here. We always love a good conversation about, kind of swinging flies, spey, double-handed rods, and fly tying. I think we might touch on all those topics today. You've got a couple great books. We've had, Dec has been on, a couple times now. And I guess we're going to get into that. Maybe we just start there at the top as far as the books. You've got a book, I guess a couple books out there. But what's the connection with Dec, first off? Because he's kind of obviously a big name out in the space. How have you known him a while?
Yeah, I met Dec back in the early 90s. We were visiting the Deschutes River every year. We'd take a group up there from the fly shop, and Dec started guiding for John Hazel. It would have been like 94, 95. And he was just one of the guides that was helping John take our group out. And that's when we first met, was on the Deschutes River.
There you go, on the Deschutes. So, and what was the fly shop you were taking a group out with?
My family owned a fly shop. I opened a fly shop up in the mid-'80s, and it was a kind of a family fly shop, and it was open for 20 years. And we closed it down after my dad died.
Oh, wow.
And so I was actually started one of the first fly fishing guide services up on the Green River here in Utah, and the fly shop was in Salt Lake, and it's one of those things, part of my life.
Gotcha.
20 years in a fly shop. But we would organize a group every year of, it started with just the six of us, my family and the Hunts, and we'd go up every year. And then the group got bigger, went to 9 people, and then eventually went to 12. So we'd take 12 people up every year for a week and steelhead fish on the Deschutes.
So that makes sense. I was kind of curious about, you've obviously got a lot of knowledge in the fly fishing space and with all the books you've written and stuff, which we'll talk about. But you had this big, kind of steelhead, I guess, whatever you want to call it, kind of steelhead trip. What were the years again when you were there fishing the Deschutes with the group?
The first year I fished the Deschutes was in 92, and it was 2 groups. The Hunt family, Greg Hunt, kind of organized it. And if you don't know Greg is one of the original Atlantic salmon fly tyers, that guild up in Seattle. And so we'd go up there and then metamorphosed into a bigger group. In fact, we've taken Tiger Woods and Mark O'Meara.
Oh, really?
And, a bunch of different people up there over the years. And I've never missed it. Since 92, I've never missed a year up on the Deschutes. So, and then the Dec thing, he's actually my brother-in-law. So as we were taking these groups up, we took my little sister up there, and Dec and Amy got hooked up and eventually got married. And now Dec lives about 10 minutes away from me.
Wow, there you go. So let's go back to Tiger Woods. I don't want to miss that one, obviously. Tiger. What was that? So now you were on a trip with Tiger, or he was describe that a little bit.
Well, Mark O'Meara, who has ended up being one of my best friends, if not my best friend, professional golfer,
Oh, yeah.
Golf Hall of Fame.
Sure.
Was very good friends with actually Tiger's mentor. And Mark would drag Tiger around on all these fly fishing trips that we'd go on. And the Deschutes was just one of them. We actually fished with Tiger quite a few times back in the day when Mark and Tiger were spending a lot of time together.
That's amazing. What was, let's go down that track. I mean, I know Mark O'Meara too, obviously. I mean, I'm not a great golfer, but I've had a little time. He was a great golfer as well, but what was he like? Just give us a background for those that know, obviously.
The Tiger thing, he was normal because we were just in a normal group. I mean, he wasn't trying to impress anybody or do anything out of the pro-am kind of that those golfers get into. If it wasn't for his fame and his ability to golf and all that kind of stuff, it'd just fit in just like a normal person in the group.
Sure.
But he actually chose a different route down the road. If he would have stuck with fly fishing, he probably would have done a little bit better in life, actually. But
really? You think so? I mean,
I think fly fishing gives someone motivation, to kind of keeps you out of the casinos and the things that kind of took him down that road that kind of destroyed his life there for a little while.
For a little while, yeah. I mean, I still look at obviously you can look at a lot of these professional athletes. I mean, it's not easy probably, right? You become eventually a bazillionaire, right? And you got all this money. But yeah, I mean, whether it's Michael Jordan, I mean, a lot of people, right, had struggles along the way. And I feel like Tiger's still out there kind of going for it a little bit, right? Isn't he still back on the golfing a little bit?
Well, it's interesting. He's building a golf course about 15 minutes from my house right here. And hopefully, one of what Mark has said, I haven't talked to Tiger for years, but what Mark has said that he wants to come out and spend a little time on the river and do some fly fishing while he's developing this golf course up on the hill. So who knows, maybe next summer we might get to see him and reunite. But it's been since the 90s.
Oh, it has. It's been a while.
He gave up on fly fishing actually pretty quick.
How about Mark O'Meara? Is he still fishing?
Mark and I fish about 100 plus days together a year.
Oh, cool.
He and I fish the Deschutes, the Grand Ron, and he loves the two-handed
he does.
rod and loves to swing and is actually really good at it. And so we do both. We Steelhead quite a bit. And he only lives 10 minutes from my house. Or, well, no, he lives a little bit for like 20 minutes from the house.
Right there.
So we spend a lot of time during the summer fishing for trout as well.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Well, you mentioned 92. So you started fishing the Deschutes in 92. It's really interesting because, there's been ups and downs in steelhead runs, and it sounds like you fished it for many years. Do you remember that in 92? Because I think those weren't the best runs on record. Do you remember those early days?
Well, 92 was actually what you'd see today.
Okay.
The big run started around 98, went into the first few years in 2000. The first trip we went up there, a fish a day was really good. Those few years where it just blew up, catching 5 or 6 a day.
The mid 2000s, right?
Yeah.
Or the whole 2000s.
Really early 2000s, yeah.
Right. So you got the steelhead trips that you're doing. And do you guys still do those?
Yeah, I actually got home from 3 weeks up on the salmon in Idaho, and we spent a couple weeks on the Grand Ron, and we go up to BC almost every year. We kind of took this year off. And,
to the Skeena.
Yeah, we go up and fish the Bulkley. I drive up, take the jet boat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the long haul.
Yeah, that's it. So you got all that going, and it sounds like you haven't slowed down there much. Talk about the books you have going. I think the first time I heard about the book, well, Dec came on and he talked about some issues you guys had, I think, publishing it, but we don't have to dig into all that. I think Dec covered that on the podcast, but I've heard a lot about the book as far as the inspiration. I've talked to people on here who you really inspired and helped a lot. And the book's amazing because of the way you did the photographers. So maybe talk about that. When did the book idea, maybe you can describe which one you started with and what you have out there.
Well, the first book, it all started, it's kind of funny, I was thinking about that this morning. It all started on Spey pages, 20 years ago. Just posting, I spent a lot of time, maybe too much time on the internet and on Spey pages, and I posted step-by-steps, at least one a week for years and so that's really what got me started as far as photographing flies and then instructions to go along with the steps. And Dec and I did a video together a long time ago, fly tying video back when you used a disc to
Oh, right.
play, you put the disc in, how old school that is.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Back in the DVD days.
Yeah, DVD, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And then, so it just kind of went from there. I talked about doing a book, and I was working on a book, and Dec said, hey, my publisher that did Passion for him wants us to do a fly tying book. And so we got together and we worked on it, and then it all fell through with that publisher. And to get the book published, all I did, I went online and I said, what's the best program to lay out a book? And it came back Adobe InDesign. So I bought Adobe InDesign and I had to learn how to use it. Took me a couple of weeks to learn how to use Adobe, and Dec and I laid the book out together, and that's what it ended up. I found a printer and paid for it to get printed, and the rest is history.
Right.
I think I sold the last copy that I had available about 6 months ago.
No kidding.
Yeah, and so that book, Steelhead Fly Tying, that book is kind of a thing of the past, and from that experience and being able to self-publish, I started on a second fly tying book with just me on trout flies and finished that last month, and it's at the printer. Should be here in January sometime, and
Nice.
Same layout as the Steelhead book with the same type of step-by-steps, and it has like 30 step-by-steps for trout flies.
Right. And what are the trout flies that you cover there? Is this more focused on swinging flies, or do you cover a little bit of everything?
It's everything. The first chapter is dry fly. The second chapter is wet flies and soft hackles. And then, I've got nymphs and streamers, and it's just pretty much all of my confidence flies that I, fish for trout with.
All right. That's it. And so the first book, the Steelhead Fly Tying, the one that you guys self-published, why do you think that one resonated? I feel like it resonated with a lot of people out there. What do you think what did you do right about that book?
Well, I think it was as much Dec. I had a following, and Dec had a following, and Dec coming off the passion for Steelhead, it was just kind of a natural moving into a fly tying book. And so, I give a lot of credit to Dec and his fan base. And then I had a fan base, and we only printed 2,000 copies of it. So it wasn't like it was a huge movement, but everybody that bought it seemed to really appreciate the work that we went to get it done. And it's a fun, easy book to follow along and learn how to tie flies.
That's the focus. And so that's Steelhead Fly Tying, Art and Design with you two. And then there's also out there, if you look, there's but there's like tying steelhead flies with style. Now, is that a different?
Nope, that's the same book. That's the issue that we had with Dec's publisher. I had to hire an attorney and threaten lawsuits, and he actually published that without permission, and that was kind of in short terms, the whole issue that we had with him. But I got over it. I mean, it actually motivated me into an area that has taken me. This is the fourth book that I've completed. I've helped two other people do books. Jonathan Farmer and his Chasing Chrome book. I laid that out for him. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we had Jonathan on, and I'll put a link in the show notes to that episode. He really said a lot of great things about you. How his book would have never come to be without the help of what you did for him. How did you connect with Jonathan, or do you know him well?
Well, Jonathan called Dec.
Oh, okay.
And said, hey, I need to put this book together. And Dec said, call Marty. And the rest is history. It's a really nice book. I mean, it turned out, I'd put it right behind our Steelhead book. And it's fun, it was fun to put it together because, I touched every photo and laid everything out. So I got to pretty well get to know Jonathan through his step-by-steps and the type of flies that he has developed. And
right.
So it was fun seeing someone else's kind of their whole thing. Like Dec and I put everything that we had into that book, and Jonathan did the same for his.
Right, right. What do you think? And there's a few books out there, Steelhead, and I've had some interviews with people, whether that's John Shuey, or Jay Nicholas, different people who've talked steelhead flies. What do you think is the difference between your book and maybe some of the other books out there, like that steelhead one specifically?
Well, the steelhead, see, every fly in that steelhead book that I did, except for one, which was a Brian Sylvie fly, but every fly that I put in that book was one of mine, and pretty much the same with Dec's. So when you look at that book, you're looking at flies that Dec and I designed. And, so it's a little bit different than just taking someone else's work and putting it down on, down in a step-by-step. But, so I think, and with the stories, the essays that go along with each of the flies in the book, you get to know where Dec and I were at when we were developing the flies and how they worked and why we have confidence in them. And, so it's a little bit different. And that's pretty much what I did with the trout fly book too, as well. I designed a lot of different trout flies and, so the trout book will have the same kind of feeling.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. And then what was the Brian Sylvie connection? He's got, you mentioned.
Well, Brian Sylvie was one of the guides that John brought in to help our group.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've known Brian since the early 90s or the 90s. And, Brian and I connected and have been really good friends ever since. So it was kind of fun. The circle that John Hazel put around him and the people that I got to meet because of John Hazel, Randy Stetzer
Yep.
was guiding the first couple trips that we did. Then Kerry Berkheimer guided before Dec started and then Dec started and Brian Sylvie and of course, Amy, John's wife. And,
Yep.
So it's a fun little Deschutes circle that we reunite every year up there.
The fish are moving and the runs are coming fast. Gear up for all your swinging adventures with the RS collection from Squalla Fly Fishing. You can head over to squallafishing.com right now and use the coupon code WetFlySwing10 at checkout to get 10% off your first order. That's WetFlySwing10 at checkout to get 10% off. Trout Routes is the most comprehensive mapping app for trout anglers. With over 50,000 trout streams, 350,000 access points, public land maps, and more, Trout Routes is the #1 resource for navigating, researching, and exploring trout streams. You can download Trout Routes for free in the App Store today. Just search for Trout Routes on your phone and take your exploration to the next level. That's Trout Routes, TROUTROUTES. What's your so it sounds like you fish some other rivers, steelhead rivers. How does the Deschutes compare to, salmon, some of these other rivers you fish for steelhead?
It's interesting. I've fished over 50 steelhead rivers in my lifetime.
Wow.
Well over 50. And, so I've been up and down the coast, all Pacific stuff,
Yeah.
Been up and down the coast from, I haven't never fished California, but, Southern Oregon all the way up to BC. And, the Deschutes, of course, we have a jet boat and we put in at max and go down. So
Oh, okay.
the fishing the boulevard days are pretty much in the past. We spend a lot of time down below max and we go in August, actually pretty early. So it's still warm and the fish are really fresh. And, so the Deschutes is an experience that I would never give up. If I had to choose one trip out of all of them, it would be the Deschutes. But the Salmon River in Idaho comes in a close second. The salmon actually fishes better than any steelhead river I've ever fished. I hate to say that, but...
Right. Just because of the water types and how's it fish better?
Well, I think that the run, as far as any of the Columbia tributaries, just for an example, we have a camp of about 6 guys, and we hooked over 60 fish this year on the salmon. And between me and my fishing buddy, Derek Bitter, we hooked like 36 or 37 fish. So the opportunities are a little bit better on the salmon just because of the dynamics of the river and the run is one of the healthiest that goes up it's as far as numbers go, there's like double what goes up the Clearwater or the Grand Ronde.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my bearings on the geography. How does that work? So for those that are listening, maybe haven't been out to the west, you've got basically the Columbia River, then you got the Snake River, right, coming in, flowing into that. And where does the salmon flow in? into the system?
So if you were to take the salmon is just above where the Grand Ronde comes in. There's a couple tributaries that kind of all confluence there on the Snake, the salmon and then the Imnaha and the Grand Ronde and then the Clearwater. And, so they're all right there in the Washington, Idaho, Oregon, kind of that corner right
in
there.
That corner. Yeah.
Yeah. The salmon's obviously upstream quite a ways from the Grand Ronde, but it's all pretty much the fish have to swim past all of that stuff to get into the salmon.
Yeah, the salmon. And is it somewhere near Riggins, Idaho? Is that where the salmon's coming through?
Well, Riggins is kind of where it starts.
Yeah.
Whitebird and Riggins is down the lower end of it. Then it goes up. They call it the River of No Return. There's really nothing in between Riggins and Salmon, Idaho. 100 miles of river that barely gets touched.
No kidding. And are you guys using your sled up there?
No, it's small enough that all we do is we take a small raft and actually it's just a little bit bigger than the kick boat. We throw it on top of the truck, and if we need to fish the other side, we just throw it in, row across, fish, and row back. And I've taken the sled up there, but there's really more work than what's necessary for that river up there.
Gotcha. So you're going to see more pressure on the Deschutes than the salmon?
Actually, about the same.
About the same, okay.
You don't have to get up, dark 30 to get a run, but you have to be up first light if you want to, get one of the better runs on the river. And so there's a little bit of competition, especially this year. For some reason, I was really busy. But then when we go up in November, so it's like, it's pretty cold and a lot of people can't handle that. And the fish are in really good shape still, and
yeah,
a lot of fun.
That's kind of an interesting thing, right? The Deschutes comes into the Columbia much, lower down the system. So is that the case that it's a little bit earlier? The run on the Deschutes is going to be earlier than the salmon?
Oh yeah, there's only 2 dams, and then there's 8 dams that they got to get over to get up into the Snake. So where we're fishing on the salmon, they've traveled 500 miles. We're fishing on the Deschutes. It's only an hour and a half from the ocean by car. So it's
right. Hop in the car.
A little bit different.
God. That's interesting. The Columbia is, the more I do these podcasts, and I've had episodes all over the Columbia, all the way up to the headwaters. It's an amazing body of water. It sounds like you spend a lot of time in the Columbia system. Are there other rivers you're fishing out there?
We used to fish the John Day quite a bit.
Oh yeah, John Day, sure.
As far as the Grand Ronde, the salmon, the Snake, the Clearwater, that whole system. I never fished the Washington side, though, for some reason. I've never done the Klickitat or any of the Washington.
Or
like the Washougal. Or
the Washougal, yeah.
Any of that stuff. Maybe it's something I need to do before I die, but we spend most of our time on the Oregon side of the Columbia.
Yeah, that's right. And then you're spending time, so kind of like similar to Dec. I know you guys are in Utah, but you do a lot of traveling around. Are you fishing a lot in Utah for trout?
I should say no, just to keep people out of here.
Right. It's no good, right?
Within 30 minutes, I've got some of the best trout fishing in the world. Easily.
Yeah.
Some of the best trout fishing in the world with fish, well over the 20-inch range. And, we've got native cutthroat streams, and then we've got brown trout and rainbows and just all kinds of tailwater reservoirs, all kinds of stuff. I got a reservoir above my house where we take the bass boat up there and fish hoppers out of the bass boat, and the average fish is 20 inches. So there's a lot of really fun fishing within an hour drive of my house.
Right. Is the book coming out? Are you as excited about this one as when the Steelhead book was first coming out?
Actually a little bit more because, with the work that I did on our book and then Jonathan's book and then now this book, after I got done putting Jonathan's book together, I went back and readjusted some of the things. And this, I've been working on this book ever since, 6 years ago when we published Tying Steelhead Flies. So it's been a long process, but I am excited because it's a different approach. I don't think anybody's really taken the approach that I did on this one. Like it doesn't start with fly tying. It starts with matching the hatch and collecting insects and identifying, the different bugs that the fish are feeding on. And so it spends, like I got a picture of pretty much every type of insect that are in, you'll find in a trout stream. So there's a lot of entomology and and then it goes from the entomology into mimicking and matching the insects. So, and the different stages. So it's not, it's not just here, this is how you tie a hare's ear. It's here, this is why you tie a hare's ear.
Yeah, right. The hare's ear is definitely a good one. Is it on the book? Is it set for a certain region, or is this a book that will apply to some areas, around the country? I know there's different hatches, different species.
I didn't even think about that as when I put it together. I just put it together for how and where and what I do as far as trout fishing goes. But, I would think that you could take it to the East Coast and any of the rivers back there, that everything would apply, except the insects might look a little bit different. The green drake back east looks a little bit different than the western green drake.
Which might actually be a good thing, right? I mean, I feel like, especially with all these flies that don't even look like anything, with all the orange, the hot spots and everything, I feel like sometimes having a different fly maybe is better. Did you touch on that in your book, some of these flies that aren't exact?
I did, and that's really what the book's all about. The book is how to tie the fly, not how to mimic what you see in the fly box at the fly shop, but so you can take any of the flies that I put in the book and change the materials a little bit, the colors and all that kind of stuff, and produce flies for whatever you're finding. And that was kind of the gist of the whole project was to say, hey, take a sample and then use these step-by-steps to mimic what you're finding on the stream that you're fishing.
So go into the stream instead of, maybe get a sample of what's out there, and whether that's a kick sample or some sort of bug sample, and then take it back and try to mimic that a little bit, and then use your step-by-step, which shows you how to do the basics.
Yep, exactly. And then I've got some new school stuff, and I've got some old, like I'm not going to admit it out loud, but I have a Euro rod,
right?
And I know how to I know how to Euro nymph, and I would rather Euro nymph than fish under a bobber, nymphs under a bobber, and so I actually during the year I touch on everything from May 15th to the killing frost. I don't put any nymphs on, and I either swing flies or fish dries. And then all winter long, I just got off my river 2 days ago and took a couple of guys down there, and between the three of us, we caught 35, 40 fish in a couple hours, so it's I will drag a nymph around if I have to catch a fish, but it's not, I just enjoy all the different aspects of fly fishing, and I'm not a purist by any means. But if I can fish a dry or swing, that's my preference.
That's your preference. Okay. What about swinging for trout flies? How is that different from swinging from like steelhead?
The only difference is the size of fly. That's the only difference. I use the same tactics on a trout stream as I do on a steelhead stream. The same presentation. I'm more into the grease lining kind of presentation, whether it's on the surface or sink tip. But I'm more just below 90 and a broadside slow swing. And so I try to do the same thing when I'm trout fishing. The only difference is I may be using one of my cane rods that I built, like a 7-foot 4-weight or, a 10-foot. My 10-foot 2-weight is one of my favorite swinging rods for trout. And then I do have micro Speys, where I'm fishing 5-weights and swinging flies on the bigger rivers like the Madison and the Henry's Fork and the South Fork of the Snake and that kind of stuff. So the size of the water really determines what rod I'm using.
Right. And what is for those that don't know the grease line, what does that mean?
Well, the grease line is just more of a broadside presentation. I see a lot of people these days fishing on a 45, and, the 45 works, but, just below 90 when it's doable. I mean, there's times where you have to use a 45-degree angle approach, but for the most part, I cast on just below 90, put a mend in, not a big mend, just a nice mend, and then try to bring those flies as slow across the current in a broadside swing so that, the fish is seeing the whole fly instead of just the rear end of the fly. And there's a bunch of things that you do. I mean, small mends, even reaching with the rod, stepping out, all kinds of ways to slow the fly down. But, just a good, slow broadside swing. Even dead drift for the first little bit, to get the flies to dip.
Right. And then the 45 is more of your, like you said, swinging it down so the fly is. So basically, if you're fishing, swinging, looking you're on river right, you're fishing a run, 45-degree angle so 90 would be straight out in front of you, and a 45 would be downstream at that angle. Yeah. So is that the biggest difference? Is the fact that the fish are seeing the butt of the fly versus the broad? Is that the biggest difference?
Well, I think, the more fly you can give to the fish, the better opportunity they're going to be able to see it and react to your presentation. The thing about the 45, you got to be very good caster. Your presentations have to be spot on to fish out on 45. If you're not getting a good turnover, if your presentation is lacking, if you're casting on a 45, that fly might not even start to swing until it's at the hang down. So you're missing a lot of opportunities when you're fishing at a 45. If you fish just below 90, the flies actually have a minute to catch up before they even get to the 45-degree angle.
Yeah, it seems like the 90 would be maybe the better tactic to use if you were newer and your cast wasn't quite as good. Is that maybe a better way to go?
Yeah. But then, you got to recognize the type of water that you're in. And through the years, I've learned the feel, when my flies are swinging, I know what it's supposed to feel like on my finger. And so if it's pulling too hard, then I know the flies are swinging too fast. A slow swing, it doesn't matter. But if the flies aren't swinging, that's not right either. So, water type has a lot to do with it. And there are times when a 45-degree approach is what you need to be doing to get a good swing.
Right. So, yeah, it depends if you're fishing maybe a slower kind of run versus, say, a faster. I mean, I guess there's all sorts. That's the thing. I always think of the walking speed sort of run, but there's lots of different habitats you're probably fishing that aren't perfect, or there are different little pockets, things like that.
Yeah, as you said that, I was thinking waist deep walking speeds are kind of the rule. But that's the rule because of the equipment we're using. Steelhead inhabit, as they're traveling, they inhabit every part of the river pretty much. But, what's conducive for a wet fly swing is waist deep walking speed. But I got into a run on the salmon this year that was one of my favorite runs, produced to fish almost every time I went into it. And then for the last 8 years, it hasn't fished, just because of the way the river changes every year. And so I got in there this year and I thought, I'm just going to put a fly through there and see if it's swinging. And the first couple casts, I mean, it was swinging so fast. And it was just like, oh, there's no chance. It's just not going to work here. But there's these soft spots on the far side. So the middle part of the run is really super fast. And then there's these soft spots with a lot of boulders on the far side. So I was, casting just below 90, putting a good mend in and reaching to slow the fly down as slow as I could before it hit the fast current. And sure enough, whacked a fish. And for the rest of the trip, that was where I wanted to be. And I caught fishing at it almost every time we went back to it. So, there's more to it than just cast and hope. Once you start to learn how to, even get a swing in some of the fastest water by, reaching and slowing the fly down. And so you end up increasing your numbers because you're fishing every cast,
more effectively. You're actually fishing
with the thought you're going to hook something. Yeah.
Yeah. You're actually fishing the fly. Like you're thinking about what it's doing. On the flies itself, you think of steelhead flies, you've got classic steelhead flies, you've got some of the newer stuff, all the different types of steelhead, spey or trout swinging. Is it similar? Maybe talk about a few of the flies that you'd be fishing for trout spey.
The funny thing about spey is I never really use spey because, it's like, what's spey?
What is spey?
And most people don't even understand what spey is. And I find, if Dec was talking about how this new movement, the spey movement and all that kind of stuff. And I said, well, what's spey? And he said, it's 13 foot plus, 13 to 15 foot rod and swinging flies. And I said, well, I think spey has kind of turned into, whatever you want it to be. I mean, you could spey socks and spey waders and spey reels and spey this and spey that. So, I'm kind of old school. I stick to the two-handed stuff. But I do, the micro spey for trout, is no different than what people were doing when in the beginning of fly fishing, when it became a sport. Swinging flies is the oldest technique of any of the techniques to catch trout. And the flies that I use are, some of them date clear back to the 17th and early 1800s, where, the soft hackle or the spider North Country flies, all that kind of stuff. So it's nothing new, and the flies are nothing new. To tie a wet fly or a fly for the swing, especially for trout, it's pretty much a standard. Now, there are things that you can do depending on the size of rod you're using. A lot of people also think that, I'm going to buy a Spey rod so I can fish streamers. Well, understanding that mass moves mass, if you get a little 3-weight two-handed rod, you're not going to be able to throw a sex dungeon or one of these big, gigantic steelhead flies, thinking that was going to be the answer. But there are, I tie these little woolly worms and I tie these little flies that I can fish on my 5-weight and do quite well swinging those. But, as far as swinging the fly goes, especially for trout, just the old school classics are as good as anything. Now, steelhead, that's a little different story because, steelhead are migratory and though you're still trying to provoke the same response, you can pretty much do it with anything for steelhead. But the fly does matter for steelhead. I mean, you can't just say, go ahead and put on a egg-sucking leech and, obviously you're going to catch fish everywhere you go, but there's better ways to do it.
Yeah, so on the trout, it's a little bit more, kind of the traditional flies, but it sounds like you do fish some streamers, maybe not the big giant stuff, but you're still swinging smaller streamers. Is that true?
Well, I've got, I tie a lot of tube flies for my streamers for trout, and I've got quite a few. Well, I still use a Mickey fin.
Oh, yeah.
Bucktails, I can tie bucktails and fish them on my 5-weight two-hander all day long because, the mass isn't there, but, you can still get a sizable streamer. And then I use a lot of feather wings, like the spruces and the spruce flies and stuff like that,
right.
Where, if you design the fly right, you can fish them on the smaller rods.
Yeah.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Kind of going back to the Ed and the intruder, I'm not a big intruder fan, but his idea to create bulk, or not bulk, but mass, bigger fly using less material. If you do that for trout, it works as well.
Waters West Fly Fishing Outfitters is your gateway to the heart of Northwest fly fishing. Renowned for their expertise in spey casting and swung fly techniques, Waters West boasts an unmatched selection of fly tying materials and the knowledge to help you explore the region's most iconic rivers. I'll never forget that morning when Ed landed a steelhead just behind me, a perfect moment that reminds you why we chase chrome and why every day is a special one on the water. Whether you're a seasoned angler or swinging for the first time, Ed and Kyle are here to take your fishing expertise to the next level. You can visit Waters West Fly Fishing Outfitters right now and mention this podcast when you stop by. Join your community for both freshwater and saltwater fly fishing adventures. That's waterswest.com. On the intruder, why are you not a big intruder fan? Just because the other flies, your other stuff works?
Yeah, it's kind of a fun story. My little sister and I, this is before Dec and Amy hooked up. We went up to the Skagit, and it was my dad, my brother, and Amy and I. And Dec Dec didn't have a guide service. He just was a guide and could only take 2 people at a time. And so there was 4 of us. And so he talked Ed Ward into taking Amy and I one of the days. And so we were actually Ed's first paying customers on the Skagit. And so we spent the day with Ed, and I was already, I already knew how to catch steelhead, but he taught me a couple things that I carry with me still to this day on that day. And, just one of the first thing that he taught me, we were fishing one of the first runs of the day, and this boat came through dragging plugs behind it. And I went, oh, crap. Oh, whatever. I'm about ready to reel in and just sit in the boat. And he goes, oh, no. He said, there's nothing better than having a boat come down through there pulling plugs. That gets the fish excited. And then when you put your fly over them, you catch them. And sure enough, about 4 casts, 5 casts after the boat went past, I hooked my first Skagit steelhead. And, so that right there just, okay, for the rest of my life, I never worried about a jet boat, or I never worried about a plug-in boat or anything. It just fish right behind him with confidence. And then the next day, we're like in the middle of the day, and he ties one of his intruders onto my end of my line. And I was using a Delta, a long belly Delta, and I'm sitting there trying to cast that thing, and it's like, are you kidding me? This is like the nastiest. Cut that off. And I put one of, I was fishing strip wings and full feather wings, and I put one, I handed it back to him. I said, here, take this thing. This thing sucks. And handed it back to him and put on one of my classics and went back to work. And I kicked myself for not keeping that fly for reasons that, transpired since that day. I've got a couple of Ed's flies.
Oh, really?
He actually, he has actually been to my house, and I videotaped him tying the intruder, and,
Oh, wow.
and he taught Dec and I taught Dec and I how he did his intruder and filmed the whole. I've never done anything with it. I still have it all.
Oh, really?
This was probably 20 years ago, but I've actually got footage of him tying his flies. But that's the intruder thing. So it was more, I couldn't cast it, and I never got into the Skagit stuff. So
yeah.
I do have a Skagit head, but it's been 5 or 6 years since I put it on.
Gotcha. So what's your typical steelhead setup, I guess, depending on the river? What do you use in there?
I blame Dec for this. He came out with the airflow line after the Delta that was called the Tactical Steelhead, and it's a 42-foot head. And then I put a 12-foot, 15-foot leader on it, and it's just kind of a mini Delta. It's not as long as the old Delta, and it's just a mid belly. And the fly lines, I've had like 4 or 5 of them, and I'd have to say that they're 10, maybe even 15 years old. And he said, look what I found the other day, and handed me a brand new one. So I've got lines that are 15 years old, and no one's even come close. No one's even come close developing one that fishes as well. And, I fish it on the Deschutes for when I'm swinging size 3, and then when I'm on the Skagit swinging the big stuff, I use the same fly line.
No kidding. And what is in that line is, what would you describe? What would you call it? I mean, I guess it's kind of it's a mid belly, you said, but it's not.
Yeah, just straight up mid belly.
It's not a Scandi line though.
No.
How would a Scandi line be different than this one?
Well, the Scandi has a taper that tapers well into, the fly line.
Yeah.
Where this tactical, the taper is probably only the last 10 feet.
Oh, okay.
So the mass is farther forward, and it's easy to get 100 feet with it.
Yeah. What are your typical casts you're doing for the two-handed casts?
Yeah, everything.
Yeah, you still do. You do.
I think if you want a two-handed cast, you got to learn them. At least a single and a double Spey, but a snap tee and a snake roll and all those things work. But I spend most of my time, if I'm river right, I'll do a double Spey. If I'm river left, I'll do a single Spey. And fishing the longer bellies, I think, is the longer the line, I think the easier it is to do some of the older traditional casts.
Wow, this is awesome. So it sounds like you're kind of equally, I mean, obviously steelhead, but the trout, and and you got the book coming out here. So maybe you can give us a couple of flies, from the book. It sounds like you cover a lot of different things in there. Which are, if you had to pick a couple of swinging flies, what would those be from the book?
Well, the wet fly chapter starts with snipe and purple, or a starling and purple. So just a thread purple body with a starling hackle. And I catch more fish on that. It's a size 18 is what I tie it on. And like if I went down to my river right now, that's what I'd put on. And,
you would?
And yeah, we moved a couple fish swinging the other day in 30 degree weather. And
what is that imitating? What's the starling and purple? What kind of?
Well, I think just anything small, midge or a blue and olive, Baetis. And then the orange, partridge and orange, grouse and orange, so any of the soft hackles. I have a full Wheatley full of just soft hackles. And then I also really enjoy fishing strip wings, where I'll take a hare's ear and put a mallard strip wing on it. And
so like the old kind of
the old school
style
wet flies. Yeah,
the old school wet flies. As opposed to, are those the two old school wet flies? Do you kind of have the soft tackle type wing and then the kind of the coachman type wing?
Well, like if you did a Google search of the Professor, which is one of my favorite swinging flies, it has a bronze mallard wing or a teal wing, so you can use the barred feathers from a duck to create a wing. Use those quite a bit. And then, just anything, even some modern day stuff that I use where I'll put a tungsten bead on a pheasant tail that has a soft hackle, so it's not pure classic stuff.
Right. So can you still swing that fly with some weight effectively?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I in Utah, you can fish 3 flies. And so I'll always have a team of 3 on, and it'll be, if I feel like I fish mostly a dry line. So if feel like I need to get the fly down a little bit, I'll put on the top dropper, like a size 12 with the tungsten bead. It can be anything,
Mm-hmm.
I add a tungsten bead to almost every fly, well, except for the small soft hackles, but I put a tungsten bead on all the bigger stuff. A lot of caddis stuff that I tie, I'll put a tungsten bead on it, and just that little bit of extra weight will get that team down just a little bit deeper, which can be the difference, So it's not all about classics. I know our Steelhead book was, pretty much all classics, but I'm not, when it comes to even Steelhead flies now, I'm not opposed to putting a little plastic in a fly.
Sure. Yeah. Right on. God, this is cool. So you feel like out of the, the wet flies, you get the kind of the 4, right? Wet flies, dry flies, nymphs, and streamers. Are you equal on all of those as far as effectiveness? Do you feel like the certain conditions, depending on the conditions, you can catch equal numbers of fish?
Yeah, it's crazy. The other day when, the day before Thanksgiving, we went down to the river and there was a very good hatch of blue-wing olives. And my son, Trevor, I'm sitting there Euro nymphing in the middle of this beautiful hatch, and he's fishing dries and keeping up with me, so I think it's more about conditions, not flies, but reading the conditions and, mimicking what's going on. And then that's where I find my joy as far as fly fishing goes, is being able to figure it out. You have 4 different styles of flies to figure it out with. And like I flipped a streamer around for a minute and didn't touch a fish on a streamer the other day, but they were definitely on the surface, and they were definitely, I hooked a couple on the swing and hooked some on nymphs. So it's more of a process than the end product, the goal is to catch fish, but
yeah,
how you catch them is more important.
Yeah. Do you feel like wet flies, can you fish those year round?
Oh, definitely.
Let's just talk for trout flies.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Especially on the water around here. All the water that I fish around here during the winter is tailwater. So the water temperature isn't brutally cold, and there's hatches every day, and you just get in the middle, especially these big midge hedges that come off. You get in the middle of a big midge hatch and swing a small 18 purple fly, catch more doing that than any other, than fishing a surface fly or fishing an emerger or whatever.
Yeah, I feel like it's, out of all the disciplines, it feels like, dry flies, obviously you got to have the right with some sort of thing, connection with the hatch or whatever. And you got streamers, which are tough, but it feels like nymphing and wet flies should be maybe the easier of the two, but wet flies doesn't get the love. Why do you think that is? Why do you feel that that's true, that wet flies aren't used as much, and why is that?
As far as wet flies go, it's like people gave up on wet flies back in the 80s. It's not a new phenomenon. You talk to anybody back in the day, and swinging wet flies, when I first started fly fishing in the early 80s, swinging flies really wasn't a big thing. And I didn't really start swinging flies until, the dry fly fishing stopped for the year. And I learned how to swing. And then when I started steelhead fishing, it was fairly new, and people were actually still, back then when I started steelhead fishing, were saying that you couldn't catch a steelhead on a fly. And then other people are saying, yeah, you just use the basic wet fly swing. So, I took my trout swing into steelheading, and that's, the first steelhead I ever caught was on the swing.
Where was that? Where was that one at?
On the Grand Ronde, right at the confluence of the Snake.
Oh, wow. Right there. Was that one of your earlier trips, or did you go for a while before you caught your
It was in the
steelhead?
80s.
Yeah.
And it was a fun trip. I actually met Harry Lemire on that very first trip. He was standing fishing the run that I wanted to fish. And he had a two-handed rod.
Oh, wow.
This was mid-'80s.
Mid-'80s.
He wasn't doing the traditional water load Spey cast with it. He was just casting overhead with it. But, you know, it was a kind of an interesting concept because we were all fishing 9.5 foot 8 weights, and he had this big long rod, and we actually had dinner together at Beamer's Landing there. We were the only 4 people in there. So we sat down together and had dinner with him and Jim Green and had rod conversations way back then. Because I was building rods. I was actually building rods back then commercially. So it was kind of interesting to hear where he was coming from with the two-handed stuff and how the whole story about how they built the rod for his wife. And,
amazing.
you know, so it right there at the very beginning, I got to see it all.
Yeah. Did you know, Did you know of Harry Lemire pretty well at that time? No.
Back then.
Did you know who he was?
No, there was nope. But,
no. Right. You didn't even know.
You know, I kind of knew who he was.
Right.
And,
but you didn't know he was
no, this was before the internet. And
yeah. Well, why is Harry Lemire such a big name out there? It feels like he's one of
I
those
think he did a lot. You know, he was one of the guys that broke ground on some of the modern day techniques that we're using today. And you know, it was well connected, you know, obviously with the industry and it would be years later where I'd see him again at one of the expos, the Albany Expo.
Oh yeah.
Tying flies. And
what year was that? Do you remember roughly?
Oh, it would have been in the 10 plus years ago.
Yeah. Okay. So like early, like 10.
But I got to catch up with him and say, hey, remember back in the day?
Yeah.
And he goes, oh, I love the Cranon.
Yeah. That's cool. Nice. Well, this has been awesome. Marty, I would love to keep this conversation going. I want to start to take it out of here. We've got our casting in comfort segment here we do, which is especially in the wintertime. Today's it's presented by Heated Core. And just want to give a shout out to Heated Core. They have this battery powered layers, like thermal layers that you can wear. And I was thinking about the other day as I turned on the equivalent of this to wearing wools and stuff like that, right? You're in your car. Sometimes if you have a heated seat, it's like push the heated seat button. It's kind of nice to feel that. Even though you don't have to have it, it makes it a little bit nicer. So we're going to give a shout out to heatedcore.com right now. For you, it's cold weather. Talk about that. What's your cold weather tip? Are you fishing throughout the entire winter? I know you guys get some snow. What would be your tip on staying warm out there?
Oh, you know, I'm obviously a Simms fan, and Simms came out with this underlayer. So my bottom layer of fjords, and I wear an extra size larger on the wading boot. And,
there you go.
You know, I actually can fish. We fish all over during the winter. Like I'll go up to Box Canyon on the Henry's Fork in the middle of January and have an absolute ball. So I think if you prepare right and have the right layers, you know, we snowmobile into places to fish.
Yeah.
You know, so if you have the right gear, you know, if you I wear waist ties when I trout fish. So.
Oh, you do? Why do you like the waist ties? Why not just go with the full waders?
You know, it's easier to get in and out of.
Okay.
And it's easier to take care of some of the issues that you have as an old person on the river.
Oh, there you go. That's good. So instead of doing the full zip.
So all I got to do, it's like having pants on. All I got to do is unzip.
That's pretty nice.
And then I can take care of those issues. But, you know, just having the right gear is key.
It sounds like you're a big Simms fan.
Oh, totally. You know, when Simms first introduced their neoprene layer.
Oh, really? So Simms had neoprene waders?
Oh, yeah. We sold them by the hundreds back in the day in our fly shop. And
wow.
You know, so Simms started out, that was all you could get from Simms was neoprene waders.
Was that the 80s? When did Gore-Tex?
It would have been 90s.
Yeah. God,
early 90s.
So Simms neoprenes. Well, those must have been pretty awesome too, right?
Actually, you know, you were thinking about it. We were probably still in Simms in the early 90s. Neoprene. Because the breathable was actually fairly new.
God, that's so good. We're doing a little event with the Skeena Spey Lodge, Brian Niska, and Simms, and some other. You know, next month we're kind of doing a little event to kick off a trip later in the year, and we've been going out and like fishing the main stem Skeena, which I haven't been up there that many times, but it's a little bit of a different game. But yeah, Simms has just been, you know what I mean? It's just that bomber gear. You know, it's one of those good companies that seems like the stuff doesn't wear out as much, right?
Yeah, it's crazy when you talk about waders. I can go through a pair of waders in a trip, especially on the Deschutes or anywhere that there's blackberries. And I just out of like on a whim, Simms came out with a special run of waders to support the Yellowstone River, and I bought a pair, and they've been bulletproof. 2 Steelhead seasons in them, and very comfortable wader. But you know, as far as any of the gear goes, you know, they have this conversation with people where, you know, they can't afford it, and Simms, you know, and spending $1,000 for a pair of Simms is just totally outrageous. But you know, that's just part of fly fishing. You do what you do. You do what you can, and you don't worry about it. You just, when you do move up into that next level of gear, you're just that much more comfortable.
Right. That's a good point. Well, let's get a couple of little random questions, then we'll get out of here. So, well, actually one not so random on casting. So we've been talking about kind of, we won't call it Spey, but two-handed casting. What is your, and I guess, is there single Spey? Like I always think of, there's some single hand Spey. You hear that sometimes. Are you doing a little bit of that, or is everything you do with swinging for trout two-handed?
No. You know, it was weird when I learned the snap tee way back in, you know, in the early 90s, was introduced to the snap tee. I thought, wow, this is great. And didn't even realize it, but it transferred straight over to the single-handed rod. And I was doing snap tees on the trout string, not even knowing that I was doing it. You know, just to reposition line to get, you know, to get a better cast when there's stuff behind you, all kinds of stuff. So learning how to cast a two-handed rod has actually increased my ability to reach places with a single-handed rod that you never would with the standard roll cast or a standard overhead cast. So, you know, as far as presentations go, you know, having a battery of fly casts, all of them, doesn't matter what the rod is, you know, if you know how to double Spey or single Spey or, you know, snake roll or any of those with a trout rod, even my small rods, you know, my 7-footers, I reposition the line using some of the traditional two-handed line stuff. And, you know, so casting, that's what it's all about. I mean, you should learn how to cast before you even approach a trout stream or a steelhead stream.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah. Casting is huge. And we've talked a lot about that. The practice, right? Getting out there and just practicing. It's kind of this lifelong craft, an amazing thing. Cool. Well, I think we'll leave it there, Marty, and respect your time a little bit here. And hopefully we can follow up with you down the line. Do you want to give a shout out maybe to your books again? Just give a heads up on where they can get this new book and when it's going to be out there.
The book, hopefully it'll be here in January sometime. I'm going to be going to all the different fly tying expos. So obviously I'll have it with, you know, in Albany and in Idaho and here. And then Mark Koenig of English Book Supply is going to have it for the retail outlets, like all the fly shops. And so hopefully we can get it in the fly shops, and then I'll have a set a website back up, and actually social media is probably where I'll sell most of them.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, we can find in, this episode's going to be out there, I guess, December, but it'll be out there, living out there online for a while. So I guess they can track you down, like we said, on Instagram. And remind us again, what is your Instagram on your handle there?
It's just Marty Howard.
Yeah, just Marty Howard. Perfect. So we will send everybody out to Marty Howard there and on Facebook. And then if folks have trouble finding you or whatever, they can track me down here. So good. All right, Marty. Well, I think we'll leave it there. I appreciate all your time today and taking us back into the history and kind of a little bit on trout Spey. I love getting that perspective. And yeah, it's been cool to hear all your connections and to finally get in touch with you here. So yeah, looking forward to maybe catching up with you later.
Perfect. Thank you.
Another great one in the books, Marty Howard. There you go. You can go to wetflyswing.com/692 if you want to get all the show notes, all the links. I'm sure we're going to have a Tiger Woods video in there for you to check out, and maybe Mark O'Meara as well. Check that out. The show notes, all the links will be there. And if you can, check out Marty's book. It's going to be out very soon if it isn't out already. Trout Flies, Fly Tying, similar to his Steelhead Passion. And also check in with Marty on Instagram or Facebook if you get a chance. Please follow this show, whatever app you're using. If that's Spotify or Apple, you can do that really easy. Just click that plus button, follow the show really quickly, and you can get that episode delivered to your inbox there. And that next episode is going to be, or at least next week's episode, we've got In the Bucket, I know is coming. Phil Roy is going to be back. I know this is a popular podcast series we've been doing. Our Stillwater guru, Phil Roy, is going to knock out some good stuff next week. So stay tuned for that. And if you're interested in our Steelhead School I mentioned on this podcast today, the Steelhead School with Brian Niska, we are bringing together the East and the West this year, as Jeff Liskay will be on this trip with everyone who joins. So if you want to find out more, send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com, or you can go to wetflyswing.com/pro, and that'll be your best way to sign up for that and get early access to this trip. That's the best way. If you get into Wet Fly Swing Pro, you got a better shot at getting in on this trip right now, and I'll fill you in on more information there. All right, that's enough jibber jabber for the day. I hope you have a great holiday season. I appreciate you for stopping in today all the way till the very end, and I hope you have a great morning. Hope you have a great afternoon or an amazing evening wherever you are in the world, and I appreciate you for stopping in and hanging out today. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.